This is the second part of 5.1 notes video. So we're graphing systems of equations to find the intersection point, which is our solution. But you might run into problems where you're trying to solve or graph an equation and you're not in slope-intercept form. So we've learned a lot of different ways to graph equations so far in Algebra 1. You could find x and y intercepts, but when you're not in slope-intercept form, like for this first equation here, it's going to be easiest for you to just do a step or two to solve for slope-intercept form. So we want to get y by itself. So your first step is always add or subtract the x term to move over to the right side. This 3x is positive, so I would subtract 3x on both sides. That would leave me with negative 2y on the right, and then 6 minus 3x on the right side. So the x, 3 has an x with it, so we can't combine terms with 6. This would need an x as well to be able to add those together, so they need to stay separate. And then our final step for getting into slope-intercept form is we need to divide out the coefficient with y. So I need to divide everything in this equation by negative 2. I can't just divide two parts of that. So dividing by negative 2 gives me y, 1y isolated by itself on the left side. 6 divided by negative 2, that's negative 3. And then negative 3 divided by negative 2 doesn't divide evenly. So let's leave it as a fraction. It also is not a reducible fraction because they don't have any common factors. But I did have a negative divided by a negative, so that's positive. So now I can see my slope is 3 over 2, and my y-intercept, the number without x, the constant term, is negative 3. So this line would start at negative 3 on the y-axis, and I would move up 3 to run 2. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So there's my first line. My second line is y equals negative 3. So I would like to look at this as 0x minus 3 because there is no x term there. So I can see my y-intercept is negative 3, and it has a 0 slope. So that is a flat line. No rise for a 0 slope. And I can see that these two lines share an intersection point right here. So my solution to this system is 0, negative 3. There's my point there. So if you're not in slope-intercept form, do a couple of steps to get yourself into slope-intercept form so that you can graph your lines. Give 15 a shot, pause the video, and then see how you do. So when I simplified both equations into slope-intercept form in number 15, it was kind of obnoxious because both of my y-intercepts are decimal form, are not whole numbers. So trying to graph this is a little bit tough, but let's give it a shot. So the first one starts at 1.75, so about there, and it would rise 3 and run 4. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 would be the other point on that line. The second point starts at 1.5, so that would be about here, and it has a negative 5 over 2 slope, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, run of 2. And this line is going to go that way. So I can see the intersection point is about right there. So let's say about negative 0.25 and 1.65. I just kind of made up some rough numbers there. Um, we could go back and check and plug that in, but honestly, this is a problem that would probably be better solved using technology. Um, Probably would be easier to get a very precise answer if we used graphing calculators or Desmos. So that's the idea with solving systems by graphing. Go ahead and try 13 and 14. Um, Make sure that you feel comfortable about it. But let's talk about number 16 really quick. So you're going to see a lot of questions like this where we need to write out equations to model some stuff. So a test has 20 questions. I bet that's important, worth a total of 100 points. So there are X number of true false questions, which are 4 points each, and Y multiple choice questions worth 8 points each. So how many type of each type are on the test? So this total number of questions is going to be important. So I know that one total I have is 20. Another total is the total amount of points, which is 100. So the total number of questions comes from how many true, false, and multiple choice. So that's just the number of true, false plus the number of multiple choice gets me to 20 questions. The second equation is about 100 total points. Well, if each true false is 4 points, that means it's 4 times the number of true false questions, which would get me the total true false points. And each multiple choice is 8 points, so 8 times the number of multiple choice questions would get me the total number of points. So from here, we've got two equations. I like to break these down into the total and then write out right next to it total what. And then that helps me put the left side together based on the rest of the information. So this first one looks really easy to graph based on finding the intercepts. If y is 0, x would have to be 20. And if x is 0, y would have to be 20. So that line is going to go from 20 to 20. Okay, the second equation would probably be easier to graph in slope-intercept form, but let's just see. So 4 or 100 divided by 4, if we say y is 0, that's 25, which would be way over here about 100 divided by 8. So if x is 0, would be 12.5, which would be right here. So these two lines are going to intersect looks to me to be right here at 14.6. So let's just check. Does 14 and 6 work in the first equation? 14 plus 6, if we substitute and check, does that equal 20? 14 plus 6 is 20, so it works for the first equation. If I put 14 and 6 in for x and y, I'd have 4 times 14 plus 8 times 6. Does that equal 100? 4 times 14 plus 8 times 6. That's 104. So something is a little bit off there. So that tells me that my solution is incorrect. So that would mean that I would need to come back to my graph and maybe make the second equation a little bit more precise. Um, so let's take a look at that. So since this didn't work, and I wanted to know, there had to have been something at issue with my second equation. But the problem is this graph is not super precise, the one that's given to me. So instead of grabbing some graph paper and expanding these axes and giving me a little bit more accuracy in my graph, I hopped over to Desmos and I plotted both of these lines. And you can see right here, this graph intersects actually at 15.5. So that's my solution is 15.5. It's probably because I didn't estimate this point out far enough, which would have brought this down a little bit. So I've just made an issue there with my estimating. So they really should have intersected about here. But what does that mean? Well, that means if the answer is, or the solution is 15.5, that means that there are 15 X was true false questions. So 15 true false questions and 5 uh, multiple choice was Y. So 5 multiple choice questions. All right, there you go. There is section 5.1.